If you've been tracking along with this series, you will hopefully know that there's a link between the questions we ask and the decisions we make. Asking good questions leads to making better decisions, which in turn leads to fewer regrets. Now, it's not rocket science. Like most things in life, we already know what we should or shouldn't do. For most of us, the solution we're looking for to solve some of the problems we make is not a missing piece of information. I imagine if you look back over some of your past regrets, you'd see a pattern. You experience the same regret over and over again. The answer, the solution, probably won't be found in something you are yet to know. More than likely, it will be found in doing or not doing what you already know. Now, throughout this series, we've given you a bunch of questions that you can ask when you've got a decision to make. But simply asking these questions isn't enough. We also have to answer them honestly and then act. So far, we've asked the integrity question. Am I being honest with myself, really? The legacy question. What story do I want to tell? And the conscience question. Is there a tension that deserves my attention? The thing that makes these questions so clarifying also has the potential to make them a bit terrifying. In most cases, we already know the answer before we've finished asking the question. That's why answering it honestly is so important, because we know, if we're being honest, that we have a tendency to not be honest with ourselves. Every few months, I meet up with a great friend of mine called Paul Wilcox. Paul is my mentor and he's journeyed with me since I was 21, so for about 5 years or so. Paul has a great knack of asking great questions. There have been times when he's asked me, "What are you not telling me that you should be telling me?" Wowzers. Now that's a question and a half. I'm then faced with a choice. Do I answer it honestly or do I fudge a response? Now, for me to answer it honestly, I first have to ask it to myself. Most of us are great at hiding things. We push things out of sight and out of mind. Now, we know about it, of course we do, but we try to ignore it anyway. Who do you have in your life that is asking you questions like this? This is why we say that intentional community is so important if we want to grow. Now that leads us on nicely to our fourth question, the relationship question. Now we'll discover what it is in just a moment, but for now, let me ask you a different question. Do you like new things? I do. I love new things. I love new stuff, but it's more than that. I love to try new foods or go to a new place. I love to start a new book or watch a new film or a new TV program. I love new things so much that I often don't finish the old thing that I'm currently reading or watching. Now, does that sound familiar at all? Who do you know who's like this? I love finding new apps or tools to help me do stuff. Now, it could be a new idea or a resource to help me play better golf, or a new app to capture tasks and to-do lists. My energy and my excitement increases with a new opportunity because it brings me the hope that this new thing might be the answer I've been looking for to solve the problem that I'm experiencing. Now, I want to share with you something new that Jesus has for you that will help you solve a problem that you are currently having. Now, that problem is you. You do things you know you shouldn't do, and it leads to regrets that you don't want to have. You probably have tried a bunch of stuff to help, but it seems it hasn't worked. If you've been around church for a while, this new thing won't sound new to you. Jesus said it 2,000 years ago, so how new can it be? The problem is that you say to yourself, "Oh, I know that," or even, "Oh, that again," but not actually do anything with it. The solution you are looking for isn't found in something you don't already know. It's found in you doing or not doing what you already know you should or shouldn't do. Now we're going to drop in on a conversation that Jesus had with his disciples. John's recorded it for us. "A new command I give you." Now that's a strange thing for Jesus to give them. Did they really need a new command? They had tons of them. In fact, they had 613 commands. Giving them a new command is like giving Messi a new pair of football boots. He's already got loads. So what is this new command? Love one another. Now, if I was one of the disciples, I might feel a bit cheated here. This isn't a new command. Leviticus 19 verse 18 says, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbour as yourself. I am the Lord." But of course, Jesus hasn't finished. The new thing he has for them isn't the command. They already know they should love one another. The problem is they weren't doing it. Jesus doesn't give them new information. He gives them new inspiration and new motivation and a new measure to help them see what loving one another looks like. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Now, Jesus has just set himself as the source and the standard of this love. This is not about something you feel, it's about something you do. Jesus looks his disciples in the eye and he says to them, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Now, we know from the things that Jesus said and the things that he did, that when he says one another, he wasn't meaning just one another. I think it's pretty safe to say that Jesus was saying, I want you to love everybody, and that my love for you is the standard for the way you are to love one another. Now let's zoom out a bit. In the middle of the room where they are, they can probably still see the bowl of water and the towel that Jesus has just used to wash their feet. They can still picture the time that they met Jesus as he invited them to follow him. It was an invitation that nobody had given them before. And they can still remember the times that Jesus had graciously and patiently forgiven them and given them yet another chance when they'd messed up. The standard that Jesus has set them is high. But what they can't picture in this moment is what he's about to do. Jesus says, I want you to love each other as I have loved you, knowing full well what's about to happen. You think this is love? You've not seen anything yet. I'm about to show you an act of love that will take your breath away and take your sins away too. Now, later that same night, they go to the Mount of Olives to pray. And the disciples are tired after the meal and the events of the day, and they fall asleep. But Jesus knows what's about to happen. A bit later on, Judas turns up with a bunch of soldiers to arrest Jesus. He obviously wasn't listening to this new command that Jesus had for them. Things go downhill fast for Jesus here. He's arrested and he's interrogated, and they find a way to make a charge against him stick. And then they really go to work. Jesus is beaten and whipped in the most horrific way. These guys knew the exact limit they can take this torture to before they stop. And this isn't an act of mercy. They wanted to keep him alive so they can continue to torture him. Allowing him to die would be merciful. His skin and his flesh are torn from his body. His tendons and his bones are exposed. And then they give him a big, heavy wooden cross to drag through the streets. This would have been a challenge at full health, let alone being close to death. And Jesus can't do it. He is so broken. So the soldiers order someone else to pick up the cross and carry it. And I don't think this made the journey any easier for him. I've walked down the Via Dolorosa in the old city of Jerusalem. It's the route we think Jesus walked on his way to his execution. Via Dolorosa means the way of suffering. And it's a busy marketplace. People are crammed in. You have to fight your way through the crowds. And of course, it was very different when Jesus walked it. But I imagine the crowds were still there. I imagine Jesus still had to fight his way through, literally. And they arrive at the place of his execution, the site of his crucifixion. And he was stripped naked and nailed to a cross and left there to suffocate on his own blood. And, we tend to picture this scene with Jesus high up on the cross, high above the crowds. But many historians think that they crucified people at eye level, inches off the ground. Jesus couldn't escape the crowd who would come up to him, laugh at him and spit in his face and abuse him. There's nothing he can do, nowhere he can go to escape the inevitability of the coming death as he's nailed there covered in his own blood and filth. But that's the thing. There is something he could do. He had a choice. This was a decision that he made. He could have changed things so that he wouldn't be arrested. He could have changed things so they wouldn't sentence him. Even during the beating and the crucifixion, he could have come down and escaped. But he didn't. It was his choice. It was his decision, and it's one he doesn't regret. Now, this is the standard of love that Jesus has demonstrated to us. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Now, is Jesus asking us to love one another like this, or to love one another because we've been loved like this? Now, there's a big difference depending on the answer or the interpretation. And it's a common question that's asked about this passage. But why is it asked? Well, Partly because we're trying to find out what we can get away with. What is the minimum that is required of us so we can say that we've loved one another? Now, let's be honest. We all have a tendency to think and act like this at times. So perhaps we need to ask ourselves a different question. Rather than how much do I have to love, ask, what does love require of me? There's no hiding from that question. If you ask it, answer it honestly, and then act. What does love require of me? In this situation, in this relationship, in this decision, in this moment, what does love require of me? Now, if you're a Jesus follower, I can't underline enough how important this question is. Look at how Jesus finishes off this new command. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, the standout sign that you are a follower of Jesus is not what you know. It's not how much of the Bible you've read. It's not how early you get up to pray. It's not how much you give or how many teams you serve on. Those things are all good and they're helpful in helping you follow Jesus. But according to Jesus, the sign that you believe in him and follow him is the way you love the people around you and the people in front of you. Now, again, this isn't new. A few hundred years earlier, the prophet Isaiah was given a sobering and challenging message for the people of Israel. The context of these words is around the practice of fasting. Now, people would go without food for a day as an act of worship and devotion to God, but really, it was trying to convince God that he should do the things that they wanted him to do. Now, they often did it to try to get God's attention so he would look favourably upon them. Their motivation wasn't love for God. It wasn't worship. It was themselves. This is what God thinks about that. Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Faith is about looking up. Following Jesus is about looking up and being united with your Heavenly Father. Worship is about looking up. It's about recognizing who God is and having a posture before him that acknowledges that he's the boss. But true worship moves us to look around. It's not just about us and God, it's about us and us. It's about one another. So much of the Bible points to this. Just look at what Jesus said and what he did. Following him is about loving one another. So this question, what does love require of me, isn't an added extra. It's intrinsic. It's central to what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And part of the reason why it's so challenging is because it forces us to look beyond ourselves. Do you want to know why you have a tendency to make the same mistakes over and over again? Do you want to know why you have a tendency to make those decisions that lead to regret? It's because your focus is on you. The most common question we ask ourselves when faced with a decision is along the lines of, what do I want? Now, I know this because I do it. We all do it. Left to ourselves, our focus drifts onto ourselves. Asking this question forces us to look beyond ourselves. It helps to put the person next to us in front of us, to think about what's helpful and beneficial for them. And this is so powerful because in the long run, what's helpful and beneficial for the people around us turns out to be helpful and beneficial to us also. So what does love require of me should be a mandate we live to. It's a beat we march to. Jesus answered this question as he willingly chose to demonstrate what love, what true love is all about. Jesus is the source and the standard of this love. Now, not long after Jesus said these words, a guy called Paul, who wrote lots of the letters we find in the New Testament, gave us a divine nudge on this. In a letter to the church in Galatia, Paul reminds us that God has a habit of nudging us towards patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Now, we refer to them as the fruit of the Spirit. Allowing God to be at work in you automatically results in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. This is the sign that God's Spirit is at work in someone. But don't mishear that. This doesn't mean that you have to work hard at being more patient and more kind. The point is that this is what God does for you and in you if you let him. Now, admittedly, this isn't straightforward, as demonstrated by the fact that most of us could do with more patience and more self-control. Asking this relationship question helps though. What does love require of me? It takes the attention off ourselves, which creates room for God to be at work in us. The good news is that you don't need to do this by yourself or in your own strength. Don't just ask yourself this question. Ask God. Answer it honestly and then ask God to help you act. Now, I'm not saying it will be easy. I'm not saying it will make your life easier. I'm pretty sure it will make it harder. But it will be more fulfilling, more worthwhile, and more rewarding. Jesus knew what love required of him. What about you?